entrepreneurial, leadership, intellectual. This is the Cultural Connections Podcast.
And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Ives, and I am the producer and the host of the Cultural Connections Podcast. We are recording this episode live on Friday, March 17th, 2023. And before I that means if you have a question for our guest during our live feed today, you can ask your questions live, and we'll be sure to do our best at getting them answered. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about today's show. Today on our show, our topic is focused around the Yunus Centre in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and the global social business work that the Yunus Centre does. Joining me on the podcast is Lamiya Morshed. Lamiya is the Executive Director of the Yunus Centre in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you again. So before we go into anything further, I would like you to give a brief, can you give our viewers a little bit of a brief introduction about yourself, who you are, and a little bit about your background?
So my name's Lamia, as you said, and I've been working actually for Yunus Centre and Grameen Trust before that my entire career. So as soon as I left university, I returned to Bangladesh, and I joined Grameen Trust. That's an organization that Nobel laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus set up to replicate the success of the Grameen Bank microcredit program in Bangladesh that won the Nobel Prize with him in 2006. So Grameen Trust was dedicated to setting up programs that are modeled on that to provide microcredit without collateral to poor women, especially poor women entrepreneurs, to kickstart their little small businesses. And as a result of the work of the Grameen Trust and other organizations like it, microcredit is kind of all over the world in virtually every country of the world. So that's the part about Grameen Trust. And then in 2006, when Professor Yunus received the Nobel Prize, he set up the Yunus Centre and invited me to head that up. And the work of the Yunus Centre is to promote a broader concept than microcredit, is the idea of social business, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more. A social business is basically a business that aims to solve a social problem. It's a business. It charges for the product or service that it provides. But the idea is not to enrich an investor. The idea is to solve a particular preset problem, whether it's related to education or healthcare or clean water or disease or societal inequities. It can be anything. The social business sets out to solve that problem in a sustainable way, in a business way. And so Yunus Centre is basically working on promoting that. And that's another concept of Professor Yunus's. And I'm happy to say that that's also become a kind of a global work. It's happening all around the world.
Great.
So that's about me, but very closely intertwined with my work.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's great. My next question to you is for our viewers that are watching or listening, for that matter, who don't know who Professor Yunus is. Can you give us a little bit of a brief background of him so our viewers can understand a little bit more about him and and specifically the work he has done?
Okay, so Professor Yunus was a teacher, a professor of economics, who started his career, just after the independence of Bangladesh in 1971. He came back to Bangladesh after he did his doctorate in the US as a teacher of economics in Chittagong University. And basically, when Bangladesh had just come out of a terrible war of independence, and there was a lot of poverty, there was a lot of hunger, and he felt very frustrated that what he was teaching in the classroom really didn't have an impact on what was happening in the lives of ordinary people. So he decided one day to step outside and see how he can be helpful to people in the village around the university in the southeast part of Bangladesh. A new country, very impoverished. And this is what he became famous for afterwards. He decided to start providing small amounts of money to people to kickstart their own businesses, because he found that ordinary men and women in the villages were completely enslaved in a system of loan sharking, where they would have to take loans at really extortionate rates of interest to even undertake the smallest economic activity. And he thought it was it was kind of slavery, because not only did they have to pay back huge amounts of interest, but those same loan sharks determine the price at which those products would be sold, for example, and it was pennies. So it was and he was so outraged by this that he decided that he had to do something about it. And this is the famous thing that he did. He gave $27 to 42 people from his own pocket. And that started this whole journey of the Grameen Bank. So the Grameen Bank was basically, he created this many years later, is a bank dedicated to providing collateral-free loans to the poorest people, to not for consumption, but to invest into income-generating activities and enable people to basically work their way out of poverty through their own efforts and not through charity. And the beauty of this is that once somebody has used the loan, they can pay it back. And once they pay back, they can access a bigger loan and so on. And so this small project, the Grameen project that he started in the village, has become a nationwide bank in Bangladesh. It's in every village, in more than 40,000 villages. And it has 10 million borrowers. And the astounding thing is that it has a repayment rate of almost 100% with collateral-free loans. And this is a kind of putting the traditional banking system on its head, because traditional banking requires people to put forward lots of collateral before they can get any money at all. Whereas what Grameen's premise was that people who need the money should get it as a priority, not because they can provide collateral, because they need it more than anybody else. So this bank, which provides microcredit, it won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006, together with Professor Yunus. The two of them joined that. And, it's sort of recognized as a sustainable way to improve the lives of people, not through charity, but through their own dignified work and their own efforts, and proves that women and poor people everywhere have all the hard work, all the initiative, all the creativity to change their own lives. And they just need an opportunity and an institution that supports them rather than any handouts. So that's Professor Yunus. He's created the Grameen Bank, but alongside Grameen Bank, he and his colleagues, I've been part of the team as well, created at least 50 enterprises in Bangladesh. Each one is what I mentioned is a social business. It solves a particular social problem. It tries to cover its costs, and it addresses a particular issue. So we have a renewable energy company, we have telephone company, we have education company, we have water companies that provide clean water. We have a joint venture with Danone that provides nutritious foods, especially yogurt for malnourished children, as a way to overcome malnutrition. So there's a whole series of social businesses created around the world on this principle that it's sustainable, it makes money, but it's done to solve a problem, not to enrich anybody. So no one takes out profits as dividends. So that's what a social business is. So we are working on these social businesses in Bangladesh, and now there are lots of initiatives around the world that follow this example. And it's growing, and we consider it one of the important pieces for the creation of a sustainable planet. One where everyone gets to share in the riches of the planet in an equal way and without causing damage to the environment. That's also part of the picture. So it's very exciting to talk about it because. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's very exciting. Everything you said is very impressive. Before I go any further, I do want to just remind everyone watching or listening. If you're watching on our Facebook page, we are live here on Friday, March 17th, 2023. And we are talking about the Yunus Centre and its work on social business. We're joined by Lamiya Morshed, the executive director of the Yunus Centre. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them below here on our Facebook page. I'm monitoring it here, and we'll gladly try to get to them and answer them live. Let's dive now into, we're going to get into a little bit later on in the podcast about the work you said that we've been doing with different universities, specifically in the States. There's a couple that we'll get into, but I want to, before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about your journey specifically, and you're working specifically very close with Professor Yunus. How did you get interested in doing this, and how did you get, what led you to get involved?
So, I was very lucky because I grew up not in Bangladesh as the daughter of a diplomat. My father was posted around the world. I was born in Japan and I lived around the world. And I was very fortunate to have this experience of being in many countries, being educated in many countries. So when I went to university, I studied in the UK. I was very filled with a desire to go back to my country to help in any way I could. So that was very much in my mind when I went to university. And actually, while I was at university in the UK, I was at the London School of Economics. They were already teaching about Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. And I was really astounded that in one of my economics classes, they were talking about what it is about the Grameen Bank model that makes it successful, and in a kind of a theoretical way. So when I was a student, I actually decided to go into it a little bit more deeply. And I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Grameen Bank. So that was my first connection with Grameen. And I spent one summer when I came back to Bangladesh working as an intern in Grameen Bank. I spent, I think it must have been about 2 months, maybe a little less, working in Grameen Bank. And that was actually the first time I met Professor Yunus while I was still a student. And so when I finished up in the UK, I actually thought, I've become familiar with Grameen's work and I'm so inspired by it. And one thing that really inspired me was the fact that Bangladesh was a country that people associated with disaster and floods and tornadoes, and a country that's constantly in trouble. Whereas Grameen was something that was developed indigenously in Bangladesh, and it was an idea that was being followed around the world. So it made me very proud that I wanted to be part of something that put Bangladesh on a map for something that was, so ingenious and so positive. So Grameen Trust, which I mentioned before, is an organization that Professor Yunus set up to help organizations around the world that wanted to replicate the success of the microcredit in other countries. So they were looking to hire people, and I joined there in January of 1994. And initially I thought, I would stay a few years and then maybe go abroad to do a PhD or something. But I just got pulled into it and I've never left. So, this at the end of this year, it'll be 30 years that I've been with Professor Yunus and with the Grameen and social business movement. And the reason I've stayed on is because I feel like this is a way that I can really make a difference, because I see the impact of the work we do every day in the lives of people in my country and around the world. And that's something that's quite, I think, intoxicating in a way, that you can see the impact of the work on the lives of people, and so you feel like doing more of it. So that's it. And the other thing about Professor Yunus is that he doesn't stay still. He's always coming up with new. He's a serial entrepreneur. So whenever something is up and running, on to the next thing. So it's a great adventure as well, in the sense that we can always getting into new types of ventures and new types of initiatives, and there's never a dull or boring moment.
Right, absolutely. It sure seems that way. Let's get into the fact. Before we get into the work that you're doing with some of the schools in the States here. Let's talk about the Yunus Centre and specifically Social Business Day. Can you give us a little bit of information on what Social Business Day is, when it is, what and what is some information?
Okay. So basically, as I said, through the microfinance, microcredit piece, we're many organizations around the world connected to us because they set up initiatives based on this approach in many countries. Some of them have scaled up to become nationwide banks in their own right in those countries. So that's one part that's there internationally. And then the social business piece has been picked up as well, and many institutions are following these principles and setting up or financing social businesses in many countries. So we decided that it would be nice to have a time once in a year or twice in a year where the network comes together to learn from each other, to present what's happening in their country or what's happening with us. So kind of an annual. It's not really a conference. Professor Yunus actually calls it a family get-together because these are all people united by the same vision or motivated by the same vision of creating a new world that's better for everybody. So Social Business Day actually takes place on Professor Yunus's birthday, June 28th. But this year, it's going to be on July 28th because June 28th falls during our religious holiday Eid. So we decided to do it a month later. And it's going to take place in Langkawi, Malaysia, because one university, like the universities I'll be talking about, is one university in Malaysia that's adopted Professor Yunus's principles as the guiding principles for their university, Al-Bukhari International University, and he's the chancellor of that university. So they've invited us to host it in Malaysia, in the beautiful island of Langkawi. So it's going to take place on the 27th, 28th, and 29th of July. And it's going to be actually the first Social Business Day in person since the pandemic has receded. The last one we had was actually in 2018. So 2019. So we haven't had a physical Social Business Day since then. So this is very exciting because a lot of people will be coming from around the world. So practitioners, academics, students, youth representatives, government officials, and it's just day and night of exchanges, learning from each other, inspiring each other, creating partnerships. It's always a very kind of inspirational gathering because it's all people who are kind of, have the same vision of creating a better world for everybody and finding practical ways of doing that. So
absolutely, it sounds wonderful. Then let's now start to get into some of the work you're doing with universities in the state. I know that you have some work that you're launching a big agreement with coming very soon with Adelphi University. Also with there's coming soon with George Washington University. Can you tell us about some of these exciting initiatives that are coming through the Yunus Centre and they're coming soon to the Yunus Centre?
Okay, yeah. So that's one of actually the really exciting pieces is the work with the universities, because we saw that some universities started approaching us to start creating content for students, course content for students around social business, also microcredit. And it was happening in a kind of occasional fashion. We would hear that a university wants to set it up. And then more and more, when more and more universities were approaching Professor Yunus and the Yunus Centre to set up this kind of collaboration with universities, it started with actually HEC in Paris. It's a business school in Paris. More than now 11 years ago, they established the first Yunus Chair for Social Business and Enterprise and Poverty, a special endowed chair. And the idea of that was to bring social business and Professor Yunus's ideas into the curriculum and so on. So then after the HSC Paris, there's a whole series of other universities that began creating what we call Yunus Social Business Centres. And we have them at the Glasgow Caledonian University in Scotland. We have them at the University of Florence in Italy. We have at universities in many, many countries. So right today, there's 102 universities in 38 countries that have established Yunus Social Business Centres. And what is interesting about these is that we don't, from our side, we don't govern what they will do. The universities decide themselves, and it's quite often the students or the faculty who approach us to set this up, and they decide, the university itself decides what aspect of the work they would like to reflect in their university, whether it's in curriculum or whether it's in research or in action research or to do a social business competition. There's one university in Canada called HEC in Montreal. What they do is a social business global competition where they bring young people from around the world to pitch ideas on social business ideas for solving social problems, and then they have trainings and mentorship and the competition, and then the winners receive seed money to start their social businesses. It's become a very large global competition. It's called the Social Business Creation Competition of HEC Montreal. So this is something that's been happening now for the last 15 years about. And I'm very excited to mention that 2 universities in the US are getting involved with us. One is Adelphi University in New York. They want to support our nursing college. We have a nursing college in Bangladesh, which is called the the Grameen Caledonian College of Nursing, and it's established with actually the Scottish University I mentioned. Bangladesh has a really a big shortage of nurses, qualified nurses. So we decided that we would create a nursing college to train up girls. And the interesting thing about these nursing girls are they're the daughters, they're all coming from the poorest families, the families of those microcredit borrowers I mentioned, and being trained up to be nurses to a very high degree. And it's been running for about 10 years now. And the girls are really scooped up every year by the top hospitals in Bangladesh. And that college is going to now work with Adelphi to develop further their faculty and their technical standards. And Professor Yunus will actually be visiting Adelphi on the 21st of March to formalize the relationship with Adelphi on this nursing collaboration that we have with them. So that's very exciting because the nursing college is one of the most, I would say, one of the most transformational social businesses that we have. It's covering its own costs. It's expanding every year. It's moved into a new campus, and it's really a beautiful program that's changing the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in Bangladesh. So that's coming up with Adelphi, and also coming up the same week is a visit by Professor Yunus to George Washington University. And George Washington University, actually for many years under the leadership of Dr. Jane Ives, has been having a program, Grameen internship program, where students from George Washington come to Bangladesh to learn about Grameen Bank and about the social businesses. And Dr. Ives has been running that program for a long time. That university now is interested to create an initiative, a Yunus initiative, along the lines of our Yunus Social Business Center, to become part of the university's formal structure and formal, program. And we have a visit by Professor Yunus to the university on the 23rd and 24th of March. That's also coming up, and that's also very exciting because, again, in a new dimension with a different angle, how a university comes into this whole thing. It's important because it's about young people and how they decide what they will do with their lives. Because if it's one of the things that Professor Yunus says is that our educational institutions are very geared towards making young people job ready, preparing for jobs. Whereas he sees very much that young people should have the option of also becoming entrepreneurs, and traditional entrepreneurs or social business entrepreneurs. So unless people are learning about social business and the fact that you can have this different type of business that's geared towards solving problems, not for personal money making, a young person would not be able to make that choice. So bringing these ideas into the university curriculum and into the teaching and learning of the university, we think is a very key part of the kind of changes we're liking to see. So whenever a new institution gets involved with us, that's always very exciting. And it's something that we, including Professor Yunus, pays a lot of attention to. And we're very excited about these two partnerships coming up.
That's great. That's very exciting. Before again we go any further, I want to remind our audience at home, whether you're watching or listening after the fact, that this episode of Cultural Connections is being recorded live on Friday, March 17th, 2023. We're recording this episode live right here on Facebook. So therefore, if you have a question for our guest, in this case today, we are talking with Lamiya Morshed, the Executive Director of the Yunus Centre in Bangladesh, about the social business work of the Yunus Centre and all of the work they do around the world. Please feel free to comment below here on Facebook, and we will do our best to get your questions answered during the live broadcast. My next question to you, as you talked about we're going to jump back to you, I think, a little bit here. And my next question is going to be what keeps you in a leadership position? Why do you choose to stay in a leadership position? What is your reasoning?
I don't know if I'm choosing to stay in leadership. I'm, in this, and we're in this work that's growing, and it's very much a team effort. So I appreciate that people have to have leadership positions and other positions, but basically I kind of see it as all of us being part of a movement for change, for creating a better world. And the work continues to grow and come in new dimensions. So we're just, all of us, it's not just me, but I would say all my colleagues, it's interesting that a lot of the people who started out with Professor Yunus 50 years ago are still around him, because there's very much a sense of the fact that we are creating institutions that are changing things, and they continue to grow because they're social businesses and they're sustainable. They continue to grow and develop and so on. So we are all in this together, and I feel like I'm just part of a big global maybe wave of people who are working to change things for the better in light of the big challenges that remain, to be addressed. So yeah, I think, it just feels like there's still a lot of work to be done. So that's why we keep on going. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of
absolutely. I think it does. Besides Social Business Day, are there other conferences that the Yunus Centre puts on every year, and if so, what are those conferences and events they would put on?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly, this November in New York, there'll be the Global Social Business Summit. That's the second time in the year that our global family kinds of meet. We haven't got an exact venue yet, but it's going to be in the first week of November. And it's similar to Social Business Day in the sense that it brings together just different of the actors in our global community to talk about all these issues, and to talk about concrete ways in which social businesses are happening, and how they're working. Because those who come in to join the movement, they want to know about specific things that are already happening in ways that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the actual practical experiences are very valuable, and so on. So the summit will take place in the first week of November in New York City. And alongside that, we have a day called the Social Business Academia Conference, where the universities that I just mentioned, their representatives come and talk and brainstorm and discuss, and where we actually have formal academic paper presentations. The call for papers is already out, and we're inviting authors to present, submit papers around social business. It's already ongoing, the submissions process, and there'll be a selection, and some of those papers will be presented in November. The likely day for the academia conference is November 1st, but we'll be formally announcing this in the coming weeks. It's not exactly set the dates and the venue, but it's happening in the US in November. So that's another date. So every June and every November are the two times in the year that we're meeting. And then in addition, there are conferences in other places. We have a specific project ongoing in East Africa called the East Africa Social Business holistic social business movement focused on youth entrepreneurship. So in the first week of May, I think it's May 8th, we are having an East Africa Social Business Forum. I will be going there. Professor Yunus will be there. My other colleagues who've been working on this project will be there. We've been working with a host of African universities that have taken social business into the university. It's about 8 YSBCs in Africa. So their work, and also a lot of social businesses that are operating on the ground, they'll be presenting their experiences. So a lot of these conferences and meetings take place. So the one in Africa is an example of a regional event that will be taking place. And all of these events are actually open to folks to attend, and we post about them on the Yunus Centre website and the Yunus Centre social media pages. So information about how to register for any of these conferences can be followed on the Yunus Centre pages and the Muhammad Yunus pages. So it's kind of round the year, many things going on in the ecosystem. We call it the ecosystem now, social business ecosystem. So those who are interested, if they just check into our social media sites, they can find out what's going on.
Absolutely. No, that's great. That's very exciting. Before, again, as we start to reach near the end of the podcast, I want to remind our viewers one more time that this is the Cultural Connections podcast. We are recording this episode live on Facebook on Friday, March 17th, 2023. And today we are talking about the work of the Yunus Centre and Professor Yunus, and we are joined by Lamiya Morshed, the Executive Director of the Yunus Centre. So as we start to reach near the end of the podcast, I want to jump back to you for a second. With the work you have done with the Yunus Centre all these years now, what do you think is your greatest accomplishment?
Oh, it's a hard one. I always think about, as I said before, that everything that we've achieved so far is something that's collaborative. It's not anything that any one person is doing. It's something that you're part of. So there's so many, projects that we've been part of helping to create. And the beauty of the social business thing is that they keep going. It doesn't come to an end, because it's independent of outside funding. It keeps going. So something that we helped set up 20 years ago with a small fund of, say, $10,000 is now a multi-million-dollar or a multi-billion-dollar initiative. It's exciting to see that, because it keeps on going beyond the people who helped them start out, I would say. And there are many, many examples of that. In the early days of Grameen Trust, I used to go to many parts of the world. We went to Kosovo just after the end of the war there in 2000 to help set up a social microcredit program when no one believed it would be possible. It was a bombed out country. It was the economy was not working. There was no currency even. There were a lot of charity programs, but no one believed the microcredit would work. I was part of the fact-finding mission, and I helped write that project and write the budget for that. And now, like 23 years later, that's the largest microfinance institution in Kosovo. It's working beautifully. It's sustainable. It's a bank, and it's still going. And this was something that started with loads of people saying, "There's no way this is going to work in this setting. How can a model that works in Bangladesh work in Kosovo, which is in the heart of Europe?" But it's there and it's working beautifully. So there are so many examples of that. And it's quite exciting to have been part of the initial team that went there when there were still sort of mines underground and explosions you could hear at night. So if I look back, there are many such things. And again, having been part of the team that helped set up these programs that still continue to serve people, I think that's gives you a sense of satisfaction and achievement.
Absolutely, definitely, I would agree with you. Wow, this has been an incredible, a little over 30 minutes, and I can't thank you enough for joining me today on the podcast, but we're already at the end today. Once again, I want to thank your Lamiya Morshed for joining me today, Executive Director of the Yunus Centre based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. If you have questions or comments about today's episode that you did not get to ask live and you still would like to ask a question, please feel free to email me directly and I'll do my best to get your question answered. You can email me directly at brianives at gmail.com. That's BRIANIV as in Victor, ES at gmail.com. You can also use that same email address to submit ideas for future episodes of the podcast. That said, we have another episode of the podcast coming your way on Sunday, March 19th, 2 days from now at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Join us for that as we discuss a very inspiring story of a diplomat from World War II who saved lives of many people in the story that's been told over film. So join us for that on Sunday at noon. And again, thank you to Lamiya Morshed for joining us today on this episode of the Cultural Connections podcast. And we will see you next time. I'm Brian Ives, and I'm the producer and host of the Cultural Connections podcast. Thanks for watching.
Thank you again for watching this episode of the Cultural Connections podcast. For more information on today's episode, be sure to check out our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also watch this episode again in its entirety on our YouTube channel. This podcast is also available on listening platforms Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Breaker, Radio Public, and New TV. Thanks again for watching this episode of the Cultural Connections podcast.